Hello, and welcome to Perfectly Seasoned, the podcast about all things culinary. I'm Greg Strahm.
And I'm Cynthia Malone.
Have you ever wondered what a Michelin Star restaurant is and how were they chosen? Stay tuned. Hello, Cynthia.
Hey, Greg.
Welcome back after our brief hiatus due to technical difficulties.
It is good to be back.
So, I have a question for you. When you travel, do you consider yourself adventurous when it comes to dining?
Oh, you know it. Yes.
Well, what is the main criteria that you look for, personally?
I like a good review. I always want to experience it myself, no matter what the review says, but I like to know about other people's experiences as well.
Well, do you prefer a Michelin Star restaurant over any other eatery? Or, does that have any color on your decision?
You know, if I'm in an area and there's a Michelin Star restaurant and I can get a reservation, I will always try to go because some of them are quite expensive and they're, for special occasions, but there are some that won't break the bank. So I at least want to do my due diligence, and if I can go, I want to go.
Okay. I have to ask you this then, since you have dined, I'm sure, in a number of Michelin Star restaurants because you do a lot of traveling. What are some of the most memorable restaurants that you can remember, and why?
Oh, well, I have dined at a 3-star Michelin restaurant before. My most favorite one was Le Bernardin in New York. And Chef Eric Repair is the founder and the chef there. He's from France. And I just adore him. He was best friends with Anthony Bourdain, actually. And when he was only 29, he got a 4-star rating from the New York Times. And then in 1986, he became part owner of this restaurant. And his restaurant, Le Bernardin, was one of 4 New York City restaurants to be awarded the 3 Michelin Stars for excellence. And I dined there a couple years ago for my birthday, did the whole chef's tasting, and it was extraordinary. I mean, the service is top-notch. They're very attentive. They know what you want before you want it. The food was divine. There was one point where I had tears in my eyes. And
hopefully it wasn't because it was too spicy.
No, absolutely not. No, the food was fantastic. And the waiter, he was this young French guy, and he had, just the best presence. And he surprised me. He brought me a little cake for my birthday. And he goes, "Happy birthday." And, that just made, and I was like kind of crying, and he was, I'm just so happy right now. And I said, "Is Chef Repair here by chance?" And he's like, "Well, he's like, he usually leaves around 7 and your reservation was at 8. And, but if he was here, he would have come out for sure to see you." And I simultaneously was so sad, but also relieved because if he walked over to my table, I would have fainted. I know he would have fainted. He is like one of my idols. And so it was kind of maybe a blessing that he was not there. But I've gone, whenever I'm in New York, I go sit at the bar and I might get a dish. Or they actually do a lunchtime special. It's like $60 for 4 courses, which is really great for a 3-star Michelin for lunch. And I'll just go and sit by myself and have a glass of wine and have a nice lunch. And I've done that every time I go. So there's just something very, very special. And for me, it's not about going to a Michelin star just to say that I've gone. It's the entire experience, and it's seeing these chefs take these simple ingredients and seeing how much they can push the envelope with them and how much they can do with them and transform a simple tomato into the best damn tomato you've ever had. If it's emulsified, if it's, flambéed, you don't know, but it's amazing. And I think just the respect I have for the craft makes this experience, just 10 times better.
Well, to be honest with you, I know too for a fact that Tim and I have eaten in, but honestly, I've never really thought about the Star when I choose a restaurant. It's a nice afterthought if we find out that it was, but I go, on the other hand, for the experience, because I'm pretty adventurous. Both Tim and I are very adventurous. Mm-hmm. A lot of it depends on the wine list, believe it or not.
Well, hey, no, I believe.
But the two that I do remember that have been the most memorable for me was Tim took me to Michael Mina in San Francisco.
Yes.
And that was an experience not to be forgotten. It was 2-star. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable. And the other one was in San Francisco on the same trip. It was an Indian restaurant called Dosa, and it was on Fillmore Avenue. Unbelievable. I wasn't exactly sure how I would like it, because Indian cuisine is not necessarily my favorite cuisine, but this was freaking phenomenal.
No, amazing.
And it wasn't about the stars for me. It was,
right.
I didn't realize that it was a Michelin Star restaurant until halfway through the meal, because the couple that we were with had mentioned the fact that they were just awarded, again, their Michelin Star. So that's kind of been my experience with the Michelin Star system. But when I was doing the research for this podcast, I couldn't stop researching because there was so many interesting things to read. For example, I always wondered, well, what does the Michelin Star mean? I mean, Michelin to me refers to tires.
Sure.
So when I typed in, what is the Michelin Guide? I mean, I knew it was a travel guide, but
sure.
It actually began in 1900 with the Michelin brothers in France. And it was a tire company, just as you see that big white doughboy-ish looking.
The Michelin Man.
Yeah, the Michelin Man. And at that time in 1900, there were only 2,200 car owners, because the automobile was for the wealthy at that point in time, and there were only 2,200 car owners in the entire country of France. And so when they would take road trips, the Michelin brothers decided to say, how can we sell more tires? Well, let's put out a guide, and let's just see if we can get people to go to these particular destinations and have it.
Yeah,
it was nothing about food, nothing.
No, it was like maps, how to repair or change your tire, but it had a list of restaurants, hotels, mechanics, and gas stations along popular routes in France.
But I think the very first ones were really heavily filled with where you can buy more tires, because that was the whole goal, is to get them to buy more tires. Their tires would wear out. So when the original guide came out, there were included anonymous restaurant reviews from all, around the country, wherever you were traveling. And it was only focused on flavor and food served, and the mastery of, the chef, I guess, and what the type of dishes were served. And this is an interesting factoid. There were only 2 times in the history of the guide that they were not published. And that was during the First World War. All through the war, it wasn't published. And then in 1939, in World War II, they also stopped. But it resumed during the Second World War in 1939. And this was the most fascinating thing of all. It's because the maps were found to be very helpful to the European Allies. So that's how the European allies were getting around Europe during World War II to help.
Interesting.
Isn't that something?
And this whole guy was given away for free.
Yep, it was given away for free. And
well, there's a rumor that they decided to put a price on it when they visited a mechanic shop and found their guys propping up a workbench. And
that's
like,
true.
wow.
That's one of those truisms. And it seems perfectly logical to me. But the other thing that was interesting is it wasn't until 26 years forward, in 1926. That was the first year they began to award a star system to fine dining establishments. Now, it was only a single star at that point, and it was just to point out that this is a quality restaurant. Right.
Yes.
Not that it was just a restaurant. That was the criteria. And then in 1931, they went to this hierarchy where they went from 1, 2, and 3. And I love the descriptions of the criteria, how they did this. This is really, really fun. 1 star, the saying was a very good restaurant in its category. Yeah, it's pretty benign,
Lovely.
pretty simple.
Right.
2 stars was excellent cooking and worth a detour.
Love that.
And of course, 3 stars, exceptional cuisine, worth a special journey. So, and those were the 3 criteria that were used in the guide. And it's evolved in its meanings over the years, and the restaurant measures its success and its placement in the Michelin hierarchy as to whether or not they get in this special rarefied air that is the Michelin Star system. And the restaurants, this is something that I didn't know, and I never thought about it. Restaurants and chefs strive to win the Michelin Star. However, it's not the chef that wins the star. It's the restaurant that is awarded the star. But it only makes sense that the restaurant that wins a star, it's brought there by the chef. So if you are a chef in a Michelin star restaurant and you were there, you were responsible for getting that restaurant the star, then technically you can call yourself a Michelin star chef. So
and as you should.
Well, true, and the stars that are not, even though there's 1 star, 2 star, and 3 stars, sometimes people mistake the fact that you're only a 1 star Michelin restaurant as not being as good as a 3 star. And there is some truth maybe in that, but it just depends on, I think, a lot of times what how the chef perceives the cuisine that he's preparing. Just because you only have 1 star does not mean that you're a fine dining restaurant. So there are chefs. Everybody strives for the 3 stars, but there aren't that many 3-star Michelin restaurants in the world.
Something to aspire to. I mean, you get 1 star, and you can start there, you can stay there, you can lose it, but it's getting 3 stars really means, excellence. Yeah, worth a journey, right?
Well, for example, in France, there are only 26 out of 594 Michelin star restaurants in France, where this all started. There are only 26 3-star restaurants. And
wow.
Yeah, and in the U.S., there are 13 3-star restaurants. Now, the other interesting thing about the Michelin Star is it's annual. You have to be chosen each year. Once you get the Michelin Star, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, the pressure to keep that star
it's high.
Is very, very high, and it can make or break a restaurant. for example, the French Laundry, which everyone knows, and
yes.
for 14 or 15 years, the French Laundry is, I think it might be the only continual 3-star restaurant for that long a period of time, three stars, starting in 2006. But it's maintained its 3-star level since 2006.
Well, Thomas Keller.
Which is one of the reasons that, and you know what it's like, because it takes 3 to 4 months to even be able to get in the door. So,
Right.
as opposed to, let's say, if it were a 1-star Michelin restaurant, it might be much easier, but the
Sure.
prestige of having that single star can make or break a restaurant's business. And if you have the star and you lose the star for some reason, that can also affect your business.
Oh, well, of course. And I want to point out for our listeners who don't know, so the Michelin Guide didn't come to America even until 2005. And even when it did, it focused on New York. And then Asia was added, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Macau. And now it's, covers 23 countries, sold around the world. But in the U.S., it's really only focused on Chicago, New York, L.A., Vegas, and San Francisco.
I found that to be intriguing. I didn't even think about that because when you hear the word Michelin Guide, you just assume it's everywhere. It's not.
Right.
It is not. And we all know that there are, in some small towns across the country, there are some exquisite restaurants that.
Oh, yes. And, those restaurants maybe are not going to be a part of the Michelin Guide just based on geography, but that's where, and we can do a whole other podcast on this, the James Beard Award comes in.
Yeah, yes.
Here in Kansas City, we have quite a few James Beard Award winning and nominated chefs here in this city. Michael Smith, he's one of James Beard. So there's a lot of great chefs, but just based on location, they might not see a Michelin star, even though they could very well be deserving of one.
Well, I think that James Beard is probably right up there with the Michelin Guide when it comes to accolades to a restaurant, because everyone knows in the industry knows that James Beard is considered a god. So
yes, and those awards were established only in, I think, 1990. And then in 2018, they changed the rules a bit to be more inclusive, to fight race and gender imbalances in the industry, which was amazing, an amazing move for the culinary world. They wanted the judges to reflect the demographics of the U.S., which really, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful thing. And recipients receive an award with an image of James Beard on it, and a certificate from the foundation, and it's really a big deal, and I always look forward when the awards are released or the nominees are released every year, and there's always a big group from Kansas City, so we're all very supportive.
Do you know if the James Beard Awards the establishment of them had anything to do with the fact that the Michelin system only hits those 5 major metropolitan areas? Because
yeah, that would be interesting.
That would be an interesting fact to find out, because you can go to New Orleans, for example. Now there are, what the food's like in New Orleans. Oh my God, one restaurant's better than the one before.
Greg, we went to a 1-star Michelin restaurant together, August.
Oh, that's right. I totally forgot
and we found
that.
out, right, and we didn't realize, I did my research as I do, and found this restaurant, and we really only discovered after the fact that it was 1 star.
That was really an amazing dining experience.
Oh, it was wonderful.
But, the pressure of getting and keeping a Michelin star is really a very, very serious and it's a very stressful thing. Yes. Did you see by any chance the movie called 42 Grams?
42.
It's a restaurant
Yes.
that was in Chicago.
Yes.
It was a husband and wife that he had or has a really bad temper, and he was driven by getting a star, and they didn't have a restaurant to begin with, so they were doing these pop-up dinners in their house for 12 people, and people would be invited. And it became sort of an underground foodie hotspot, and in 2010. And then he was so driven to get a star that in 2011 they decided to lease an abandoned restaurant, and they turned it into this restaurant called 42 Grams. And the film follows their development and about his temper, his trying this burning desire to get this star at any cost. And when it opened in 2014, the first year he won 2 Michelin stars, which is really, really hard to do out of the box. I mean, there are restaurants that are in business 20, 25 years that never even achieve that. So he did it the first year out of the box. And then once that achievement was made, it just kept harder and harder, and he just got more and more difficult, I guess. And in 2017, the restaurant abruptly closed. And his wife helped him through all of this. And in the film, you can see that it had a bad effect on their marriage, and they eventually got divorced. She continued working with them. But in 2017, the 42 Grams in Chicago closed because he was convicted of domestic battery.
Oh, dear.
So, fast forward in 2019, he's now looking for forgiveness, and he's opened a new restaurant called Stoneflower, and sure enough, he's driven the same way. He wants that Michelin star. He wants that Michelin rating back. So
Right.
it's an obsession sometimes with these people and the chefs, and it's really unfortunate because of the wear and tear on your staff, because the turnover. One of the great things about working in a restaurant of that level is the consistency of the staff, because they get into the groove. They know what they can read the chef, they can read the other people, the team that they're working with. And the turnover is not as great as you might think. But when you have someone who has this drive and at any cost, it makes it much more difficult for the restaurant, I think, to maintain that status. At least that's from my point of view. So
yes, and there's a lot of some chefs, I mean, don't or feel like they want to get away from it because it is stressful, and they say that it limits creativity, and everyone has their opinion, but you can see, I mean, of course it's going to be stressful. Of course it's going to be you don't want to lose a star. I think that's probably more stressful than trying to get to the next star, than the constant concern that you might lose it.
That's the other thing is a lot of times when somebody says, well, this is a Michelin star restaurant. Well, is it currently a Michelin star restaurant? Because it can be given and it can be taketh away just as easily.
Yes.
And the interesting about how they get the star is they have these, they're called inspectors, air quotes, inspectors. And
How
you
do I
don't
apply for that job?
I know, I would love that job myself. I'd be big as a house. I couldn't do it. But the Michelin reviewers are called inspectors, and they are completely anonymous, and they're not allowed to share any of their knowledge of the restaurant or what their experience was. except possibly with other inspectors. And I also read an article in one of the things I was researching that some of the inspectors, their families don't even know what they do for a living. I mean,
Wow,
how
that's
crazy
very
is that?
top secret.
But that's what they do. And they're not prohibited to speak to journalists. And once a year, the Michelin Guide comes out. And I'm not sure if it's for in all areas of the world, but because now it is so worldwide, I'm not sure if each area has a different launch date. But for the most part, it comes out usually in the fall, sometime between September and November. And interestingly enough, the criteria for reporting on the visit to the restaurant, it only covers the quality of the food, the presentation of the dishes, the mastery of the culinary technique. These are direct quotes. And they ignore the elements such as decor, table settings, and the quality of service. Now, I find that last one a little hard to believe, but
Right.
that is part of the dining experience. But you know what? I'm not the one who is awarding the stars, so there you go. But
Wow. Well, but you know what? It's rumored that Michelin inspectors only make about $32,000 a year. But they
and all the food they
travel.
can eat.
Yeah, they have about well over 200 great meals a year. Maybe the worst thing is the calories and the kilos or the pounds that you put on. But hey, it might be worth sending your resume in.
Yeah, it's interesting because there have never been any photographs or anyone. If you type in Michelin inspectors, you're not going to find. I don't think you're going to find photos.
No, nobody should know. And, restaurants say that there's like tells, oh, this is probably an inspector just by maybe how they dress. Like it's a little too nondescript or, they act a certain way, but no one's supposed to know.
I don't know. That sounds to me like paranoia.
Because very well could be.
If you're jonesing for a Michelin star, I think that one of the first things that's going to happen is you're going to become paranoid as hell because everybody that comes in there, if they act a little difficult or a little too nice, you're going to think, oh my God, that's an inspector. And they get treated differently than the everybody should be treated. And I think that's one of the, I don't know. I think that would, if I noticed that and I was an inspector, that might color my, I don't know if it's a vote or what, but that might color my experience because someone was treated differently than
Right.
one diner was treated differently than another diner. And that's what the dining experience is about. Everybody should be treated the same. But
Absolutely.
another interesting thing is female chefs that have worked in restaurants that have become Michelin stars. Only a handful. The statistic that I found was 4.7% of the chefs in the U.S. are women, while in the United Kingdom there is a whopping 20%.
Wow, go ladies.
Yeah, and there are a handful of female Michelin star chefs in the U.S. Remember, I say Michelin star chefs because they were responsible for the restaurant that was awarded the star. So
Right.
I just feel like I have to keep qualifying that. But the first U.S. female chef to get 3 Michelin stars, and I think she still has those 3 Michelin stars.
She does.
Dominique Crenn. And
She is.
I would love to go to
favorite
that
of mine.
restaurant. Have you ever been there?
No, and I've never been to San Francisco. It is in the top of my list. Because she has Altile Crenn, and then she opened a little restaurant, I think just next door, called Bar Crenn. which is a little more neighborhood feel, a little loungy, less expensive, more familial. And yes, I think she's fantastic, and I would love to go.
Yeah, in reading her bio and about her, she doesn't seem like the typical, let's just say the typical Gordon Ramsay type. I think she's probably very creative. She seems, just from reading about her, the way she thinks, that she's very, her team is very important to her.
Absolutely. And we're doing a whole other episode on this, but I will just touch on it briefly. There's a documentary type series on Netflix called Chef's Table.
Oh, yes.
And there's an episode all about Dominique Crenn, and you follow her going back to France to visit her mother, her life in San Francisco, working in the restaurant, her dishes, her creative process, and she really just comes across as just a very kind person, and she celebrates her staff. And when her restaurant wins, everybody wins. You know, her pastry chef is so talented, and so and the series touches on quite a few chefs who we are going to talk about. We have talked about in this episode. So if you have Netflix, I highly recommend Chef's Table. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I have, along with this podcast on my website, you'll be able to click on, there'll be some links there as well that are interesting things about the Michelin Guide, some of the, who are the top chefs in the world. There's also some interesting factoids about the stars themselves, and
awesome.
It's the other thing is that just because you are trying to get a Michelin star for your restaurant, it's not actually everybody's cup of tea. I've found this hard to believe, but I can understand, given some of the articles that I've read about trying to get the star or the rating. Although there's a really high reverence for holding this award by most of the chefs in the industry, there seems to be a growing trend by restaurateurs to reject the Michelin star all around the world, and some of them have gone as far as to demand that their star rating be removed because they feel that the expectation of the star system is unreasonable and it restricts the creativity of the chef and the team. And
that's what I mentioned. It's, they do feel that way, and they're like, I don't want this hanging over me. And, it's unimaginable to me. But if you're in that industry and you don't want to have to live up to that star's expectations and have people who don't know, like wine points, right? Like, let's say your wine didn't get high points. Well, points don't matter all the time, and you don't want to dissuade someone from going just because of a star so I can see their point. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I asked you the question at the very beginning. Is that one of the criteria that has to be met when you're traveling? Is that it's a Michelin
star? Not has to. No, I mean, of course, they have a star for a reason, right? So I'm going to go there, of course, but I go to plenty restaurants with no stars, and they're wonderful as well.
But the Michelin Guide is not the only travel guide out there. There are some really good travel guides that have restaurant recommendations in them that have been around for many years, and I don't think they should be just put on a shelf to gather dust because, not everybody's taste is exactly the same and not everybody's budget isn't the same. So some of the restaurants in Fodor, for example, which is an excellent travel guide, it's a little wieldy, I will admit, but there are a lot of good recommendations for hotels, restaurants, things to
Sure.
do. So,
Well, I'm going to send you as well a link to put up on the website. It's something that when I do my research, I reference. Business Insider has a list of Michelin star restaurants all over the world. I think this particular list was put out in 2018, but it's the least expensive Michelin star restaurants where you can go and maybe a dish is $26, or you go at lunch. I know in New York there's a place you can get a little bento box lunch for $18 from a 3-star Michelin chef. So you can try it on a budget as well. So I'll send you that link.
Oh, that's great. That would be great.
Everybody.
Because I also have a link about the restaurants that are, how many restaurants in the world have Michelin stars and how many stars they have. So that's an interesting fact as well. But just in closing, I have been dying to say this. One of the things is, I said before that, the Michelin guide giveth and the Michelin guide can taketh away.
Right.
Did you know that Gordon Ramsay is the only 2-star Michelin chef that's ever been stripped of his 2 stars?
I did not know that. Gordon.
No one's been apparently it happened because one of the restaurants he had owned, there was some bad blood or something in London. And this is the other thing. Once the chef leaves, the stars stay with the restaurant. They don't follow the chef around. Right. You can say that you have 1, 2 Michelin stars, but you actually don't have those stars because only the restaurant, as I said, is awarded the stars. But he is the only, his restaurant was the only Michelin restaurant, 2-star Michelin restaurant ever to lose its rating. So, and that was devastating. The article that I read, whether this is true or not, I'm just saying this is what I read, is that he cried because he was so distraught that he lost 2 Michelin stars.
Well, yeah, you worked so hard for that.
I know. Wouldn't you like to see Gordon Ramsay cry, though? I'm sorry. I just got to say that.
That would be something to see. Wow.
Yeah. I have to say, though, I do idolize him. I don't work like him. I've worked under people like him, and I know how to take it, but it's not how I work. I like to work with the team effort where that's not in my DNA. But
he is so talented.
Well, he still holds 16 stars.
I guess that's fine. Right?
Yeah. And what was the name of the chef you were talking about in New York?
Eric Repair. Eric Repair.
Because I thought I did read something about it. Because I also have a listing of the top 10 ratings in 2020, and of course you know who's on the top, Joel Robuchon, who happens to be no surprise, but he happens to be a mentor of Gordon Ramsay. So
well, not surprising. I've been to his restaurant in Las Vegas.
Oh, Gordon Ramsay? Or
Joel.
Yeah, I've never been to one of his. He owns 12 restaurants. And, that's the thing. I got to thinking, well, how can you be 31 star, have 31 stars? I mean, your restaurants. Turns out that a lot of these world-class chefs, as their career possesses, and let's say that their restaurant gets 1 or 2 stars, then they start buying other restaurants to try to build on that. And he owns 12 restaurants.
Well, side note, we got our first Gordon Ramsay restaurant here in Kansas City last year at Harrah's Casino, and I have not been yet. It just reopened after the pandemic, so I'm hoping to go soon. I've been to many of his restaurants, in Vegas when we used to go every year, but It's quite a thrill to have, one of his restaurants here in Kansas City, of all places.
I know this might sound strange, and it might sound like I want to punish myself, but I would give anything just to work one dinner service under Gordon Ramsay.
Oh, I would do it in a heartbeat. I might cry through the entire thing, but I would want to do. I'd want to do it.
Listen, I would cry after when nobody would see me, but during there,
it would take everything I could not do it. But when I get frustrated, I cry, and I think I would just have a constant stream of tears.
Well, you'd never work on my team, I can tell you that.
That's fine.
Babies don't make good team members.
I'm not meant for a cutthroat kitchen. Absolutely
no, well,
not.
I'm not a cutthroat kitchen. Well, listen, I posted some really fun links, and Cynthia's going to send me some links to post. We're going to be link heavy this week, but there's so much fun stuff to read about.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to be on my website, thesilverchef.net. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook at The Silver Chef. You can also listen and subscribe to the podcast on.
Please subscribe and leave a rating.
Yes, you can subscribe.
We want 5.
Yeah, we want 5 stars. Yes, that's what we want. And also, you can do that. You can subscribe and listen to the podcast on my website, and also on iTunes and Spotify.
Amazing.
I'm still working on it, but my Instagram is thesilverchef_Hope Sound, and you can follow Cynthia at
_.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thanks everybody for listening. Have a great week. This is Greg Strahm
and Cynthia Malone.
Hoping all your days will be perfectly seasoned.